help women, save lives, and peacefully end abortion where you live.
I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired.
You were serious about that?
Be inspired to change hearts and minds by joining over 1 million volunteers taking part in the global movement happening in your neighborhood.
She says, pray that I can get through this abortion. And I said, oh, no. So she went ahead and went into the abortion clinic. And she just came out. She told us, I'm not going to get the abortion. We just had a baby saved. We had a baby saved in Memphis today. Praise the Lord.
This is the 40 Days for Life podcast with your host, Sean Carney.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the 40 Days for Life podcast. I'm Sean Carney, the president of 40 Days for Life, and your host for this podcast, which is dedicated to helping you end abortion where you live. And we are inching closer to the great month of October, and we are on the verge of the largest 40 Days for Life campaign ever, which kicks off on September the 27th. And so we are very, very excited. And because it's October, almost October, we are going to talk a little bit of baseball here in a moment, since that's getting interesting. And more importantly, we are going to respond to President Trump's comments. Why? Why did he do it? Why did he say these stupid things that we have to do an entire podcast on? I know there are many other groups and many other causes that have probably done podcasts on dumb things he said about other issues, but this was finally the time that Donald Trump, for whatever reason, and I have some insider baseball of probably why he said it, and we will break that down, President Trump's comments, and how dumb Republicans are in 2023. So for those of you who think we're one-sided politically and you've missed all the negativity we've talked about Republicans the last 6 years on this podcast, today you will have no excuse. Your denial will end, because we will talk a little bit of what to say and what not to say with these politicians who are just butchering the victories in the pro-life movement, and it's on full display. So we will break that down, and we will have emphasis on President Trump's comments, what it means. Will he backtrack? He hasn't yet, which is bad. He has done that in the past. Other politicians have done that in the past. So we'll talk a little bit of national political landscape in regards to post-Roe America, and somebody to talk about that who has a wonderful background in politics and baseball is Mr. Steve Carlin. Steve, how are you?
I'm doing great, Sean. As you can see here, I'm well, for those who are listening, I suppose you can't see. I'm decked out in my Brewers stuff because the Brewers are in first place. And when I saw the Trump interview, I just decided I needed to go to my happy place.
Yes, and I want to do a shout out to the Brewers because my favorite Milwaukee Brewers story is when you told me that a couple of years ago, the guy, I'm sure alcohol was not involved at all, but the guy stormed the field and started acting like he was a player. And when they arrested him, he said that he identified as a Brewer.
Yeah, you can dress like one, you can identify as one, but apparently law enforcement did not accept that excuse. I think it was some kind of phobia. I'm not sure which phobia that is, but it's definitely they're definitely phobic.
He's my hero. That guy is one of the best. Everybody, that's something your buddies in college would have talked about doing, like if you're in the midst of this trans insanity and you're like, let's go and identify as a witch or whatever and try to whatever. But to actually do it, to actually storm the court and say you're a Chicago Bull, storm the field and say you're a Milwaukee Brewer, gold.
When you're the fan of a team that is literally named after people who manufacture beer, you see some interesting stuff at the ballpark.
You do. You absolutely do. You absolutely do. So, I'm not sure. Churchill was asked if he was an alcoholic, and he said, "I don't know. I just know alcohol's been better to me than I've been to it." And I think that's kind of when you think about Is alcohol at professional sports team stadium overall been good or bad? And that's a tough debate.
I saw a
But
guy one time going into the stadium, and he got stopped at the security line because he had a flask taped to his ankle, which is like mildly amusing to witness happen. But the best part about it was then when they caught him, he said, "Oh, he didn't know that wasn't allowed."
So here's my interest in that guy. And it's either bad or really, really bad. He's an alcoholic, and that's really, really bad. Or it's economic. And I didn't realize this was a thing, but like at the Astros, there's this huge signs everywhere of like, you cannot bring in metal flask. And I'm like, and they have metal detectors at the Astros game. So you can't bring in any flask. And so I was like, this must be a real problem. So it could be people saying, I don't want to pay $9 or whatever it is for a Miller Lite. And so I'm going to sneak in my alcohol. So it's either economic, they're cheap and they want to drink, or they're drunks and they just, it's like more alcohol to consume. So
could be all of the above.
Cheap and drunk. I think that's a country song somewhere. Okay. Why do we have to do this? All right. So it is.
Speaking of people who appear to be drinking,
and Trump does not drink. He drinks Diet Coke religiously. So there is no doubt Trump is the most pro-life president ever by far. And we've said that many times. We'll continue to say it. It's still true. Hopefully, God willing, in some decade or year to come, they'll be the most pro-life president ever, and that'll be somebody who just ends it all, right? But we're a long way from that, unfortunately. The Republicans overall are butchering the pro-life message. And before we get into this, I mean, I think Trump was a great president. I think he's one of the best presidents we've ever had. Outside of all his comments and who he's offended and all of that, I understand all that. But brass tacks, his actual accomplishments, we actually still have the Trump tax cuts. Biden's been totally ineffective overall as a president, having real change. He's just destroyed our military. But this whole notion that Trump wasn't a good president, I don't buy into. He was a very good president on many, many issues. And he did things no other president would ever do. You know, like stop the signing of a pipeline bill because he realized the steel wasn't going to be made in America. So he made him go make a last minute edit and then send it back, or stopping the negotiation for Air Force One because he knew how much planes cost. And he said, Boeing is ripping us off. And he saved us tens of millions of dollars on Air Force One. Just little stuff like that. Not to mention the tax cuts and the unemployment, all that good stuff. But abortion, by far, the most pro-life president ever. And I was an early Trumper in 2015. We can put some of those pictures up. Helped a friend of a friend do an event for him in Houston in April 2015. He hadn't even announced his presidency yet. And I helped this friend out kind of behind the scenes, host Trump. He paid his own way, and she wanted me to hang out with him. And I was like, my gosh. I mean, I'd watched The Apprentice and seen Home Alone too, like everybody else, but I thought this guy's going to be a jerk. He's going to be demanding. Total opposite. Totally down to earth. Had to drag him through stuff because he's stopping to like take pictures with teenagers and anybody who wanted his attention. He was totally a gentleman about and all that. And then like we took him to this press conference, Steve. They turn on the lights and he just like lights everybody. I think the Baltimore riots were going on at the time. And he's like, there's going to be 20 more Baltimores if Obama gets his way. You know, and it's just like, what happened to the nice guy? It was great. I loved it. So anyways, and I believed him. I believed that Trump was going to do what he said. Many in the pro-life movement did not. And we have said many times, Hillary Clinton gets elected without the death of Justice Scalia. This is something, Steve, you've pointed out, that the hardcore evangelicals and Catholics who said, Trump's a loser, he's been divorced a million times, I'm not voting for him. They were pushed over the edge by the emphasis on the Supreme Court due to the death of Justice Scalia.
I think some of the pundits, it's a little bit of a macabre analogy, but they referred to the 2016 as the Flight 93 election, comparing it to the flight where on September 11th was hijacked, and then the patriotic Americans were able to bring it down before it went into the Capitol or into the White House. And similarly, it was sort of looked at as like, okay, we don't really like the alternative of going with Trump, but we've got to bring down a Hillary administration before she appoints another pro-abortion justice, setting back overturning Roe v. Wade by decades and going whole hog on the anti-family agenda, which we've now seen these last few years what that would have looked like, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting when they did overturn Roe. Twitter blew up, and it wasn't in the way that I thought it was going to be. It was, to all of you bleepity bleep who refuse to vote for Hillary, this is what you get. You know, it was basically attacking Democrats who were just mad at Hillary, or Bernie Sanders supporters who didn't vote for Hillary. It was kind of attacking them once they overturned Roe. I thought that was interesting. So Trump, through actions and results, was excellent. He gave us the 3 justices that did overturn Roe v. Wade. He listened to very well-educated and faithful Catholic and evangelical leaders, one Catholic in particular who essentially told him who to put on the Supreme Court. Trump listened to a T and did it. He listened when you didn't think he would listen, and on that subject he did, thank God, and we did overturn Roe. That brings us to now, Steve. So Roe's overturned. I don't think a lot of these Republicans like that, honestly. The single issue voting bloc for pro-life is very big. It's a big constituency, and it's faithful. It's very faithful. You can ask Trump, because people, single issue voters, just went for him. They didn't like him. They probably wouldn't have had him over for Thanksgiving. Maybe they thought he was immoral, whatever. They eventually came around and they're like, oh my gosh, this guy's a great president. But in the beginning, it was not so. And they voted for life. Okay. So this is a big constituency that the Republicans don't want to lose. And once Roe was overturned, I don't think they ever thought it would be overturned, and I think they freaked out. We see that in some of their comments. So, Steve, why don't you set up the clip, and then we'll show the clip of what Trump recently said so that people can judge whether we're right or wrong, or he's right or wrong.
So Trump is being interviewed, and he's asked about the state of abortion legislation in the United States. The interview kind of covers both state and federal level legislation. They're particularly sort of asking him what he thinks about a 15-week ban and on abortion nationwide. And this is what he has to say.
If a federal ban landed on your desk, if you were reelected, would you sign it at 15
Are you talking about a complete ban?
A ban at 15 weeks?
Well, people are starting to think of 15 weeks. That seems to be a number that people are talking about right now.
Would you sign that?
I would sit down with both sides and I'd negotiate something, and we'll end up with peace on that issue for the first time in 52 years. I'm not going to say I would or I wouldn't. I mean, DeSantis is willing to sign a 5-week and 6-week ban.
Would you support that? You think that
I think what he did is a terrible thing and a terrible mistake.
So you can kind of see he's not even necessarily asked about the heartbeat acts that are signed in various states, including in Florida, but he goes on the offensive. It wasn't even like he was kind of caught by, okay, well, I'm on the spot here and I've got to go after my rival. He took the initiative and went after the Heartbeat Act in Florida, describing it as a terrible mistake.
And this is a problem, not just for the abortion part, but to me, this has been a proven Trump problem, which is I don't know what to say right now, so I'm going to attack someone on the fly. And that can lead you to, it's red meat when it's your crowd, but it can also lead you to looking like an idiot. And this is what this did. This made Trump look like an idiot. If you're a Democrat or you're pro-abortion, you're like, you think it's a terrible thing they did a heartbeat bill? You're the guy that gave us the Supreme Court. You're the guy that overturned Roe v. Wade, which one thing in the world Donald Trump won't take credit for, shockingly. But when he doesn't know what to say, he attacks his opponent. And in this case, think about what he did. First off, the heartbeat bill makes abortion illegal when you can detect a heartbeat of a baby. So you're dealing with, this is the success of the heartbeat bills. It's this warm, beautiful moment of legal protection that humanizes the baby, because we're talking about heartbeats. So it's great. Ideally, there's no abortion. And it's like, well, now you have to have a heartbeat so that you can continue to live. But this was like the easy, everybody loves a heartbeat. It's 6 weeks. It essentially ends abortion in most of these states because it's so early. One of the reasons Planned Parenthood hates heartbeat bills more than any other thing. So the heartbeat bills are politically very good, and they're pro-life. So not only does he not answer her question, he attacks DeSantis, which is normal. That's what they're doing right now, is they're attacking each other. But he attacks DeSantis for doing something really great that Floridians agree with and that all pro-lifers agree with. And that is very common. It's not like the heartbeat bills are super rare, right? It's not the all-out ban like in Alabama. So I didn't... he's attacking him for being more pro-life than him when his party's platform is pro-life.
It's a wild thing. This is where I draw the strange comparison. Imagine if you go back in time, say 20 years, 25 years, and say that of two presidents, evangelical George W. Bush does not show up at the March for Life, but a future president, Donald Trump, I think people would kind of like have their minds blown at that point anyway, but the future president, Donald Trump, would be the first president ever to speak live at the March for Life.
It's so true. I mean, it's just, he said what he did in Florida was a terrible thing. And we're going to get into this, but there's no follow-up. Why was it terrible? Why is it bad to prevent abortion at 6 weeks? But he didn't know what to say, and the audience heard it, where he's like, I'm going to bring together, everybody's going to like me. It was, to me, it was Trump at his worst, because it was the worst of his personality, which is all about him. And it was also not believable for any side. If I'm pro-abortion, I don't believe a word Donald Trump says. I don't care if he comes out and says, I support partial birth abortion. I'm not voting for him. He gains no votes whatsoever by this stupid response. He loses a lot. He loses a lot. And here's one thing. I don't think we're supposed to say it out loud, Steve, but I'll say it. There is a lack of concern on the Republican Party of something that we don't have within 40 Days for Life, but we know is out there in the world for the general public. And that is many or some, depending on where you live, pro-life people think that abortion's over because of Roe. They don't understand what's going on. They don't get into the state to state and putting it in a constitution or a heartbeat bill. They don't keep up with any of that. They think the Supreme Court overturned Roe, and so there's no more abortion. So they may be less likely to vote. And I think I'm worried about pro-life voter turnout for national elections, for sure. And I don't think we're supposed to say that, but it's like, no, we know the fight's not over. We know the fight's not over, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people in church don't. A lot of people who are hardcore pro-life voters don't. They don't realize the fight's not over. And it's amazing in these like super pro-life swing states, like where you live, Steve, in Wisconsin, voter turnout will be crucial. And if people are like, yeah, I think abortion ended in Wisconsin, but they're trying to get it back, it's just less of an issue. And I can't believe that the Republicans aren't being more pro-life and owning the overturning of Roe with this, like, the Democrats want to take us back to 1973. We won't go back. Like this sort of positive rah-rah. Aren't they worried about pro-life voter turnout? I know I am.
Yeah, and you should be. At the same time, when we saw the election this past November that did not result in the pro-life gains that were expected, it wasn't so much because pro-lifers didn't turn out. They did. It was because abortion supporters turned out, and people who are kind of on the fence, and where maybe they talk about like the women in the suburbs who kind of are conservative fiscally, but they lean a little more liberal on the social issues. The belief is that we lost them. And so I think Trump is trying to make a play for them, but it's pretty difficult here because, as you said, this doesn't satisfy one abortion supporter, and it doesn't satisfy one pro-lifer. I think back to the aforementioned March for Life that Trump spoke at. My wife was listening to it on the radio. She said she cried. She said she's listening to it and hearing like, here are everything we've been fighting for, praying for, hoping for, our values, our understanding of the dignity of man and woman is created in the image and likeness of God. And here you have it coming right from the mouth of the president of the United States. It's going to alienate people who are saying, wait, it's a terrible thing that we're, which babies do we want to die and which babies do we not want to die now? I'm confused.
And I'll say that this is the only, this is a lame defense of Trump. But I'm getting all these text messages and phone calls from people go, why did he say that? What's going on? I do know, and I have no idea, and I'm not blaming, he doesn't get off the hook for it. But I do know that there was a wonderful, faithful Catholic woman who advised him on all pro-life family stuff, and she was awesome. And she's no longer doing that. I don't know. I just know she's no longer there. I don't know if she got fired or she quit or it was mutual. I have no details of that. But I know she's no longer there. And there clearly is a pivoting in how he handles abortion. So he's still doing it. He's culpable. But I do know that the advice he's getting on abortion is different than what it has been in the past. And it shows in a bad way. Because the assumption here, Steve, and we can talk about whether it's true, is pro-life a political loser?
I think that it's a political loser as it's been handled by perhaps the majority of Republican elected officials and politicians, but I don't think it has to be. They haven't. There's a way where you can make the case on this issue that will be compelling to the American people. We've talked a lot of times about how Trump masterfully dominated Hillary in the debate where he brought up and the late-term abortion. And you can make a point of emphasis on late-term abortion without conceding all of the babies up to 15 weeks. You can go after late-term abortion without allowing for early abortion. He did it masterfully in that election, talking about how you can have an abortion right up until birth. And I think about Senator Rand Paul was being interviewed about his stance on abortion, and he said, wait, you're pro-life, no exceptions, no abortions at all. Isn't that extreme? And he said, well, you tell me what you all think about carving up a baby at 8 or 9 months in the womb, and then we'll have a conversation about who's extreme. I think we need to go on offense on this. I think this is a case where we need to really look, as wild as it is to say, I think we need to look to the LGBTQ movement as an example. They've never worried about being too extreme. And yes, they've gotten some pushback this year as Pride Month is kind of like fallen off a little bit, and people are speaking out against carving up these children, castrating children. There is some pushback, but that pushback is on the most extreme part of their agenda. They've essentially 99% of the LGBTQ agenda is no longer controversial. And that's because they pushed for it all. They went for broke and they got almost all of it.
And if you look at that movement, great example, what's hurt them recently is the wokeness. I think there was a pro-gay or I'm okay with the gay thing sentiment in America pre-2020. And then they got roped into the woke stuff and the trans stuff. The Bud Light scandal was the trans stuff. I don't know. That's a tough one. Bud Light just would have had a gay guy that said, I drink Bud Light and I'm now the spokesperson. That probably would have hurt him, but not the level of the dude that thinks he's a girl. And then the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, that was just the extreme of the homosexual movement. And they would have never let them out in public, a couple of years ago, I think pre-2020. So I do think that the woke stuff has hurt them. I don't think it's a political loser either. I think there's two things. There's the Rand Paul comment. There's the extremism of we don't have to defend life. And you're half of our country, half of our politicians want the same abortion laws as North Korea and China, and they want abortion at 40 weeks, and they're going to deny health care to a baby who survives an abortion. Until we talk about that, then yeah, I'm going to defend all life. But there's that part. There's also the compassionate side of what kind of government is, and this is where fiscal conservatives don't like it, but the Democrats hate it when you do what Greg Abbott did, and you allocate $150 million a year for single women who choose life. That's a lot of money. And Greg Abbott just owned it. We have the heartbeat bill, then we had the overturning of Roe. Done. Abortion free. Been abortion free 3 years now. Just done. And right when he passed the heartbeat bill, 3 or 4 years ago, they started the allocation where you could get support for a certain time and you apply and everything else. And if we're going to fund Planned Parenthood $500 million a year, we certainly can help single moms. Steve, you're not going to find an independent, maybe an independent, definitely not a Democrat or a liberal, who is going to deny government funding to single women. It is such a trap, political trap, to use the abortion issue for that. And to brag about those programs, but also to, to actually show that we do care about the women. I think it's very, very important. So the fiscal conservative right now, Steve, turns off the podcast and says, we ain't giving no government funding to anybody and you got to pull. That's done. Thank you, FDR. The whole idea that we're not like just shoving money out the door to people. I would just rather it go to something that's going to save a life. So I don't have a problem with it. I'm fiscally conservative, but I've also given up a lot on the fact that we're, we just have so much bureaucracy in government, and it did start with FDR. Maybe that'll generate some emails. But once we did the New Deal and the government just started taking over major sections of the private sector, Texas has a surplus. They use $150 million for it for single women. I have no issue with that whatsoever. I think it's a huge political winner when put in that context, Steve.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that we need our civil laws and our criminal laws to reflect the natural moral law. And it is in the common good for women to be empowered to choose life. And that's what this legislation does. That's what these programs do. So I think the folks who are making the argument that they want to get rid of these programs to help women in need, I think that it's largely sort of the intellectual people who they like to have the conversation in their brain, but it doesn't really apply to the real world. You know what I'm saying?
And I think Trump or any other Republican can just look into the camera and say, I don't want to deny the humanity of any American, no matter their religion, their size, their gestation. Like, it's 2023. It's amazing what medicine can do for unborn children. It's amazing. We do surgeries on them. We have so much precedent to protect them. I think we owe it as a right to life in the Declaration of Independence to protect all unborn children. And I'm not ashamed of that. In fact, I'm proud of the Supreme Court for dragging us out of 1973 science. That's it. That's it. Because we never make them defend Roe. Somehow Roe is like Tom Brady. It's just like untouchable. Tom Brady is clearly the greatest football player in the history of the NFL. And it's like they have made Roe this perfect thing where, it's like you're attacking Tom Brady. You're not attacking Tom Brady at all. Okay. I don't want to throw a quarterback under the bus, but you're attacking something that didn't work and was really, really bad. Ryan Leaf, that's what it is. There you go, Steve. There's a reference for you. A bust, something that didn't work and was never going to work. And that whole, with all due respect to Ryan Leaf, if he listens, that whole notion that we're supposed to feel bad because Roe was overturned is total BS. It's one of the greatest days in our country. Not one Republican said that at the debate. Not one of them said that they were proud of the Supreme Court. They were proud that Trump had the courage to put the justices on there. Or even you can ignore Trump and say you're proud that the justices had the courage to do the right thing. And as Gingrich said, Roe v. Wade was bad law. And Sandra Day O'Connor said it was on a collision course with itself because of science. They will not own the science part. And I think that the Republicans look at the abortion issue as this negative thing that in the back of their mind, they're like, don't bring it up, don't bring it up, don't bring it up, don't bring it up. And then it comes up and they botch it. And Trump botched it. He didn't answer the question. So he attacked DeSantis, and he attacked DeSantis for doing one of the best things DeSantis has ever done in his political career.
Yeah, I think, Sean, some of this, in a way, we're victims of our own success when it comes to the Republicans. I think there are a lot of Republicans that campaign as pro-life. They vote pro-life when it comes up before their desk on all the legislation. They vote for pro-life nominees. But I think it's worth asking, are they all pro-life? In that case, I think many of them aren't. However, the pro-life movement has been so successful at influencing the public sphere through its grassroots activism. This is where we're doing very well, where we're kind of dragging the politicians along. And so you've got politicians who, they don't care one way or the other about abortion, but they see where history is going. They see where their base is going. They see what the future holds. And so they're like, okay, I better get on board with this. Just like not everybody who, passed the civil rights legislation of the 60s was in favor of getting rid of segregation and eliminating racism. They just knew they had to do what they had to do to survive. And so I think you've got Republicans who don't care about abortion, but we've got enough influence in the pro-life movement that they're getting on board. This is why we see, Nancy Mace show up at a prayer breakfast and crack wise about how she, her boyfriend wanted to stay in bed with her, but she had to go speak at the prayer breakfast. And this is why we've got
her live-in boyfriend.
Yeah. And the news that, the pro-life, pro-family governor of South Carolina is like having an affair with Lewandowski, the Trump aide. Like, we've got all of these cases here where people are not living.
And the Colorado
lives.
congresswoman making out in the theater. Train wreck. I mean, just got divorced or is almost divorced, making out with some dude in a kids play. You're just like, do they? It's like they're trying to get on Saturday Night Live. Do they not know the news? And I know we're all fallen and there's scandal, right? But how are politicians so stupid after years and years of Clinton, Anthony Weiner, who was destined for a disaster with that name? All of these things, you just see politician after politician, like, what were they thinking? And, it's such a mess. This is why they are politicians. They are not, they're not, you vote for them based on their policies and their stances. If they're moral and upstanding, it is a huge bonus. That's why I don't like people attacking Pence for whatever reason, because Pence is a good man and we know him, and he's just a good man. He may be bad at politics sometimes, whether you agree with him or disagree with him. But he's a good moral man, but a lot of these people, it's just total mayhem.
But that should be, I think that should be slightly encouraging. Overall, it's bad that we've got these weak Republicans, but the fact that they feel that it is in their best interest to at least pretend to be pro-life, I think is a sign that we do have real influence.
That's for sure. That's in the backlash Trump has gotten. So let's get into this 15-week ban thing, because some pro-life groups are pushing this, and Steve, we'll do a separate podcast in time. There's an esoteric approach to why people want the 15-week ban. It would only prevent 6% of all abortions, number one. So that's why we're like, it makes no sense. It also makes no sense. You're 14 weeks and 6 days, and then somehow in that miraculous 24-hour period, you get to be an American. Congratulations. It's like, well, what happens? What's the change? I mean, when to vote is 18. When to drink is 21. You could have those little arguments, but the result isn't death. So if you don't get to vote till you're 19, we don't kill you. So anyways, there is an esoteric argument to the 15-week federal ban, because it will permit states to end abortion in an easier fashion. And so we don't have time to get into that. We'll probably dedicate a legal podcast to it in the future. But that's kind of where this comes from, to defend our friends who like the 15-week ban. However, all right, we just mentioned that it would be 6% of all abortions take place after 15 weeks. The abortion industry would never go for that, Steve. They called it draconian. So he's supporting something, trying to get independence, and it's not even going to do that.
No, the media called it draconian. The pro-abortion supporters called it draconian. In Europe, this would be more liberal than many European countries' abortion laws. On the other hand, so it's an odd thing that we seem to have this complete lack of awareness as a society of what abortion is and when it's allowed and when it's not allowed. We don't understand fetal development. We don't know when the heart begins beating. So we throw out these terms like 15 weeks. And I think there's a real risk in that, because I think it can lead to sort of this empty compromise where, like they have in Europe, where we're going to get rid of the really, really messy late-term abortions, and we're not going to touch the early abortions, and everybody kind of has this uneasy peace about it. That's what Trump said. He's going to bring peace to the issue. That's not a win for unborn babies if we just kind of settle and, okay, we'll give up the worst and messiest 6% of abortions and accept all of the rest. I don't think that's a win for us.
I don't either. And our other point on this with his interview is that he says, I think that's a terrible thing what DeSantis did. Why didn't the reporters, NBC interview, which was actually very well done, and it's great because Trump still goes on NBC and like he insults the mainstream media, but then he'll actually do interviews with them. So I do like that about him, along with a lot of other things, except for this. But why didn't she ask? So why did Florida do that? Like, why did Florida pass the heartbeat bill at 6 weeks? I mean, it wasn't just DeSantis doing it. They had the votes. So people of Florida, who they're elected legislators. Why did they do that? Or what week is it for you if you're not going to commit? So it's not 6 weeks. It's not 8 weeks. It's not 10 weeks. Like what decides that? Because if I'm a pro-abortion reporter, I want to pin. Now, for pro-life, obviously, we're saying you can trap somebody and say, well, what week do we get to decide that you get to stay or you get to go through abortion? Because we're now playing God, so we can just pick the week. But if you're pro-abortion, the way to flip that around on somebody like Trump who's fumbling is to say, so you think it should be 8 weeks. So I'm not going to say that. You think 15 weeks. People are talking about 15. 15 is very popular. Patrick Mahomes is 15. I like 15. He won't commit. And the reporter sits back and says, I think this is why most Americans think it should be up to the woman and her doctor. Boom! Yeah. You crush them. You crush them because you just drug it out of all these politicians controlling women in a back room, and you put it on the heart of a woman in a medical atmosphere with her doctor. By the way, that's how they argued for abortion before they went nuts a few years ago, and it was very effective. And now that they're nuts, our job is a lot easier. But that's the cost of going nuts and screaming and pounding the table for abortion at 40 weeks. But when Republicans, this is what I would do if I was a Democratic strategist or a liberal media member who believed in abortion. I would get them in this stupid week-to-week debate, and they're all fumbling around. And I would look at them and I'd say, guys, I think this is why we all know, deep down it should be left up to the woman, because we don't know.
It's not treated as a matter of life and death. It suddenly becomes, should the tax rate be 16% or 17% or 19%, and everybody can have their own opinion on it.
You're making it healthcare. You're making it something that she needs. No one's ever needed an abortion. So it's a great example about the tax cuts. It's like, it's also, do I get both hips replaced or just one? Do I get triple bypass? The doctor said I could do quadruple because that artery is a little clogged. Like, let's kind of debate this out. It's not that. It's an elective surgery that ends the life of a human being. So fumbling around only makes you look really, really bad. And for us, we curse America because we say we're, in the same category as North Korea and China, and that Europe is so much more conservative than us. But that's not the case in Florida and in Texas and in Tennessee. When you go into these states with the heartbeat bill, they become the example, the political example of how to dramatically decrease abortions, because when you do that, the clinics have to close. You can't keep an abortion facility open with a 6-week ban. It's just, it's not, pun intended, viable.
I think it was journalistic malpractice by the reporter to not probe a little bit, whether she is an activist or maybe she was the most fair-minded reporter in the world. When he says it's a terrible thing that they did, the obvious question is why? Why do you think this is terrible? That's the question I was asking when I watched it. Why does Trump think this is a terrible thing? I could speculate as to what his answers might be, but it's kind of wild because you'll remember Trump fumbled very early on in his first campaign coming out the gate about abortion when he said something about like, yeah, they should be prosecuting women who have abortions. That would be like the talking point that we've heard from the abortion industry for so long. It's a terrible thing to ban abortion because we don't want women who are desperate going to jail for exercising their rights, that sort of thing. But they never asked Trump that. So we don't know what he thinks was so terrible about it. He never offered the opportunity for any clarity on it.
But when they don't know what to say, they say something stupid. And Trump did it with this comment. Nikki Haley was like nails on the chalkboard. She had this profound, well-rehearsed comment on abortion in the first debate that made absolutely no sense. It like sounded good. Like she practiced it and all her advisors were like, get him, Nikki. And then you're like, what did any of that crap mean? And she ended it by saying, I think we can all agree that we should not be giving the death penalty to women who have an abortion or abortion doctors. And you're like, what? Now you're putting words into your constituents, your pro-life constituents' mouths. No one in the history of the world has ever advocated the death penalty for a woman who's had an abortion.
I think I'm going to use this as an excuse for everything I screw up in my life. Like, honey, you said you were going to take the trash out and you didn't. Now it's overflowing. I think we can all agree I don't deserve the death penalty for failing to take the garbage out last night.
Yeah, it's what we've been asked not to reference Seinfeld, so I apologize. It's like what Seinfeld says about landing on the moon. It was like the worst thing that could happen because now everything is compared to that. We can land a man on the moon, but we can't get our dry cleaning back in 24 hours. You know, we can land a man on the moon, but we can't. You just fill in the blank. But that is the result. So what she did is she rehearsed that. You could tell. Because it was abortion came up and she was confident. She was out of the gate. Like, here we go. I'll own it. They won't know how to articulate it. I will. And I'll be the compassionate one. Like, we have to be realistic. How many times have we heard that from a Republican or any kind of politician? Look, I'm being realistic here. So right when they start in on that, she goes through her whole thing. And then she ends with her death penalty analogy, which is so weird because there's a lot of people that support abortion that are against the death penalty. And so now I don't know what her goal was, but that's the result of not knowing what to say and not being able to articulate it very well and just kind of having the sensational one-liner, which is awesome, but the one-liner must make sense. And the one-liner cannot be accusatory towards your own voters. And the one-liner cannot be inaccurate. And Trump did it. She did it. I'm sure there'll be more. I'm not even going to acknowledge some of these other goofball candidates. But Tim Scott was pretty good on abortion. He was okay. And DeSantis has been good on abortion. But they got to get it together because it's a political loser because of who's talking about it and the way they're talking about it.
See, I differ. I think, you made the remark before that Trump's comments were stupid. And I agree that they're stupid and an objective evaluation. But I think I see some method to the madness here because sometimes as pro-lifers, we forget that Trump has two different constituencies that are very different. One of them is pro-lifers who voted for him because of the courts and they voted for him because of his pro-life policies and have continued to support him in many cases since his presidency ended. And many of them loved what the Trump administration meant for this cause. But then there's also a significant constituency of Donald Trump who are maybe not conservative in a traditional sense. They're not socially conservative for sure. They call them the Barstool conservatives. It's sort of named after this, this Barstool sports analysis website. It's run by this guy named Dave Portnoy. And
are you acting like you don't know what Barstool Sports is?
I have not been a consumer of Barstool Sports.
I haven't either. I don't really know what it is, but when I've seen it like on Twitter or something, if it pops up, but I'm telling you, as somebody who's known you forever, I've seen it and I'm like, I've heard about it like on the radio, and I'm like, Steve's probably obsessed with that. He knows everything about it. And so now as we're recording this podcast, to realize you actually don't know what Barstool Sports is and you're in the same category as me is shocking.
This is from, everything I'm saying about Dave Portnoy and Barstool Sports right now is from the 40 Days for Life podcast research and development wing. I
feel like you're saying in that I think there's a team north in my state. They have like Pack in their name. I don't know what they are. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know much about him, but I guess this guy has kind of made a name for himself in that he's not conservative and that he's pro-abortion. He's pro-gay marriage. They're really a libertarian streak where they've had enough with the woke stuff. They don't want the trans stuff crammed down their throats, and they're not really keen on 8-9 month abortion, but they're also very much not pro-life. And that was a major part of the Trump base. And I think Trump is sort of looking at it and thinking, okay, well, I've sewn up this primary nomination. Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't, but I wouldn't blame him for thinking that he's got the nomination in the bag based on what we're seeing from the early polls so far. It's not like, oh, he's up 10. It's like he's up 40, 50% at a time. So I think he's like, hey, I got the base anyway. I've got the nomination. And that's why so typically you see candidates for office, they go hardline ideological during the primary to shore up their base. And then the moment they secure the nomination, they go for the center. They go for the moderates. They go for the folks who are in the middle of the road. And I think Trump is just figuring, hey, I've got this sewn up already. The pro-lifers will come home. I'm better than Biden. I'm better than AOC. And I think he thinks he can count on pro-lifers to vote for him. And he's going after these folks who are kind of like, they're not going to vote for Biden, but they might not vote at all. They're sort of this libertarian-minded streak of secular conservatives.
I think you're right. I think he's running the general election right now, and he's ignoring that there are these primaries. And unless things like, it would take 3 or 4 more of these kind of gaffes, but pro-lifers are upset at him. I mean, this is where it's getting to be less intelligent for him to skip these debates. And we're recording this before the second Republican debate, just as a note. So looks like he's going to skip. We don't know if he will, but that's becoming less intelligent if the Republicans can get in there and beat him up, or at least one. DeSantis can get up and say he can criticize Floridians for protecting the unborn. I'm not apologizing for it. I guess we see where he stands. I mean, there's a lot of ways to go on the attack without Trump being able to defend himself and be able to sit there and say, you don't tell me about pro-life. I appointed Amy Coney Barrett. I'm Mr. Pro-life. You don't know nothing. He won't be able to do that. He'll just have to take it. I still think it would take a lot for somebody to actually catch him in the primary. So I think he's running in the general, and I think he is smart. And what you said is probably true, which is he's not going to gain voters by that comment in the general. He's probably not going to lose voters, unless my little concern and theory is that he will demotivate pro-life voters for turning out in the general. And I think politics is getting so toxic. Voter turnout is very, very important. And we know that Trump helps voter turnout of Democrats for sure. But he can't lose pro-lifers who are like, look, I overlooked a lot. I overcame a lot. I tolerated a lot of comments from a lot of relatives at a lot of holidays for voting for Donald Trump. But I did it because he was pro-life and he said he was going to defend life. Now, I don't think he's pro-life anymore, so I'm not voting. I think that's a risk in the general. I really do. I think it's a risk. And there's a lot of good Christians, faithful people who will just decide not to vote. And I know we get mad at them, but that's the reality. I mean, that's just a statistical fact. I want to go back on one point you made. So, Steve, you said he's got like the pro-life conservative people supporting Trump, and then you said the sort of libertarian, socially uh, socially liberal but conservative, sort of independent. We don't trust the system. I think there's a third large group, and they're the main group that fuels Donald Trump, and that is the drain the swamp. You're the only guy that can take them on. They are after you. They raided your house. They only come after you because they're afraid of you. You are the white knight. They know it. I will follow you to hell, and we got to drain the swamp. And maybe they're pro-life, maybe they're not, but their main concern is that America is the center of the world and can only be salvaged by Donald Trump. And that's the majority of his base, I think. The drain the swamp, it's us against the world, it's us and them. And that's a large base. His base has shrunk, though, since 2016. And that he's got a lot of weaknesses going into the general election, I think, because just statistically, I think he's lost a lot of independents that elected him in 2016. And I think he's lost some of his base. And those are the two things that beat Hillary. He went into the Rust Belt, and these people in Michigan were like, what the heck, I'll give him a chance. And he was independent and all that. He's lost a lot of those people. And whether you like it or not, it's January 6th. It's a lot of his behavior. It's a lot of his comments post 2020. He just lost a lot of his people. And that hurts. And that's unfortunate. But he's got a lot of vulnerabilities going into the general election. So I do agree with you. I think that's why he's running now in the general.
His political instincts aren't flawless, and I think there's this tendency to suspect that they are because he won the big upset in 2016. Oh man, everyone counted him out. Everyone gave up on him, and he won. And he won maybe not percentage-wise of the vote, a landslide, but electoral college-wise, he won a landslide. And so there's sort of this temptation. Maybe you see it when we watch football, Sean, where you think, oh, you've got this defensive coordinator. It doesn't even matter who the players are. You've got like this sort of hidden, esoteric, semi-Gnostic genius that's going to allow you to just keep winning and winning. And really, I think what happened is in 2012, Obama won in spite of bad economy, all these different metrics where they're like, a president has never won re-election if unemployment is this or if the economy is that. And Obama won. And I think the Democrats sort of believed that they had settled in upon this perpetual majority and they would never lose again. And so they got lazy in 2016. Hillary didn't visit Wisconsin once during the 2016 election. So just for everything Trump happened to do right that year, there was also a lot of luck and there was also a lot of stupidity on the Hillary side. And they didn't make that mistake again. 2020 is like, how could Biden get that many votes? I don't think that's possible. Well, I mean, when you don't take states for granted and they went out and they pounded the pavement every single day with whatever their methods were, they weren't leaving things to chance again. And that's a little bit of an uphill climb for anybody who's going to go up against the Democrats of any party.
And on the 2020 front, let's do the rigged election part of the podcast. So on the rigged election thing, whether you think the election was rigged or not, what we know now is that talking about the 2020 election being rigged doesn't help. That's not a winner. And Trump continuing to talk about it is proven. You can look at everything. It's like people are like, I just don't want to hear this. Do you think it was rigged? Yes. Do you think it was rigged? No. Do you think it was rigged? I don't care. I'm tired of hearing about it. And I've heard people say the election was rigged and that it's going to be rigged in 2024. So if that's the case, then it's over. Who cares? Why are we even talking about this? Why
Run?
It's total rigged. It's all a scam. We don't live in a democracy. It's the end of the United States of America as we know it. But states have done a lot to prevent election fraud. I know Georgia has. Thankfully, Texas has, but we didn't really have any fraud. But we know that talking about that, living in the past, I don't think anybody wants to go back to November of 2020 to January 31st of 2021. I mean, all of that was pretty miserable. Okay. Anyways, it's just one of those things where we know certain things are losers, and he doesn't seem to be doing it. The Obama example is genius. People cannot go back enough. It's fun now. If you have time, go back and watch the first debate between Romney, weak, horrible candidate, and Obama. And Romney mops the floor with Obama. Obama looks like an 8th grader who finally has an adult in the room telling him that he's a moron. It's awesome. It's awesome. Do you remember that, Steve? I know you do.
I do. My son was born that week, so I watched it in the hospital.
And you skipped your son's birth so that you could keep up to date on politics.
I got other sons.
That's right. That's right. We're going to have a lot of kids. I don't need to be here. It's awesome. And the polls go up, and I was like, there's been a lot of moments where I've looked like an idiot in my life. That was one of them. I was roaming around. We lived in Virginia at the time. I'm like, it's over. Finally, we'll get rid of Obama. Romney's going to walk in. And I said that about Trump too, but everybody said I was an idiot. But then that actually worked. I really was an idiot with the Romney thing. And he lost because Obama ended up recovering. Obama ran great campaigns. I didn't like Obama. Like, his presidencies were awful. I can say all that. Don't go crazy. But, like, just a phenomenal politician. Phenomenal. I mean, he upset Hillary. That's still one of his biggest things ever. It's like when George W. Bush upset Ann Richards to become governor of Texas. Probably his biggest political victory ever. But Obama ran a brilliant campaign. He survived that debate. He turned it around. He lied to do it. With the tax cut thing, the Romney, my secretary pays more taxes than Mitt Romney. It's a total lie. All of these things. And he won. And that's one of my fears. It's hard to get rid of an incumbent. And I don't think we'll have that problem this go around because I'm not sure Biden's going to run because I'm not sure Biden will be able to walk or know that there's an election. But let's say Biden was in perfect health, I'd be really, really worried. I'd be really, really worried. Like if Biden wasn't out of his mind, because it's hard to get rid of an incumbent, very hard. And Obama proved that because he had a weak opponent, but he had a horrible record. Remember Benghazi? All that happened, Steve, in 2012. And it's just total mess. So
we still weren't out of the 2008 recession. But Sean, if you feel like you made yourself look silly by predicting that Romney would win, this will make you feel less silly. Usually the candidates, they know by like 5 p.m. whether they've won or lost. Like they've got all their little agents out and they've got their exit polls like way more sophisticated than what the mainstream media has. They know if they've won or lost by the time polls close.
Is that true?
Yeah.
They really know?
They typically do. But Romney, they were sure that they had won and they were setting up the victory fireworks the evening of that election.
And didn't he have something where the get out the vote software like bombed?
Failed entirely. It was untested.
Mercy. So anyways, I remember seeing the highlights of Obama campaigning like the week before, and he's in Indiana and he's on the phone calling these people, and he hangs up the phone and he's like, "We can win Indiana." And he starts clapping. And I'm like, and you got to hand to the guy. He's really optimistic, but he lives on the moon. He's not winning Indiana. Woo! He won Indiana, and I was there for it. I had to speak in Indiana that week, and like the whole crowd was like, "I can't believe he won Indiana."
There was a "this is going to be a long night" moment.
This is going to be a long night moment. Okay, we covered the bases. We covered the fact that you don't know what Barstool Sports is, or at least acting like that for some reason. Let's you have a theory. I already know this podcast is generating a lot of emails, probably negative and positive, at podcast@40daysforlife.com. We read them all. If you really want your email to get read, make it negative. We'll see it for sure. Even if you don't mean it, and you're just like, you can say psych at the end. We'll laugh at that. It's funny. All right. So your theory is that, I don't know if I don't like this, but I'll read it.
Okay.
Steve's theory Pence was the pro-life voice in the Trump White House. Trump and Pence have fallen out. So now who's advising Trump these days? Now, I just mentioned that the advisor thing, that it's not the same woman.
It's not. So my theory that you don't like isn't that different from your theory?
It's not, but it's a cop-out. It's like a cop-out that I don't think Trump is well educated on this issue. And I think he came into it like not really caring. And he sat down with Susan B. Anthony and everybody else, our friends, and they said, this is what happens in an abortion. He's like, you can't do that. I mean, that was the report. That's not what it is. That's terrible. And then finally he was like, good night. This is evil. They want to kill the baby up to 40 weeks. So he stuck with that and it worked. I don't think he's ever done a deep dive, but I would like to give him credit for his pro-life convictions as president. And I guess just to say, it was all Pence. Trump doesn't listen to anybody ultimately. I mean, he did with the recommendations of the Supreme Court, but you really think it was just Pence?
It's a thought. I don't know. One of the reasons I say this is because back as he was in the process of taking office, I think between the election and the inauguration, I just kind of wondered, like, Trump kind of obviously has his pet projects. Like he wanted to deal with China. Can't copy the voice the way you do with China. And he wanted to make deals, and he had the things that were priorities to him. And I think I just struck me as though he was willing to delegate the things that he wasn't super interested in. And it's incomprehensible to me to think that we had the most pro-life president in American history who's giving these speeches that are making pro-lifers cry at the March for Life. And then he's like, heartbeat bill is a terrible thing. I can't reconcile. I'm trying to square the circle. It's a theory. I don't know whether I believe it or not, but I think it's worth floating. It's an interesting conversation to have.
If you are Trump can come out and say the most absurd thing, but you're still going to follow him to the gates of hell. If you're just hardcore Trumper, the defense is that somebody told him to say that and he followed bad advice. However, he has done that before and then corrected himself. Remember, was it last year? I can't even remember. It was after Roe was overturned. Maybe it was the fall. And he said, all the pro-lifers went away. They got what they wanted. They got Roe and then they just disappeared. The whole pro-life movement disappeared. And everybody in the pro-life movement got mad. And then like 2 days later, he corrected that. So I kept waiting for that with this comment and it never happened. Maybe it will once the podcast comes out. I don't know. So we may eat our words, but he has not backtracked. And it was the heartbeat bills are extremely popular. Here's just the non-cynical part of being a human being and an American citizen. The heartbeat bill changed the minds of a lot of abortion supporters who had it explained to them. I mean, we can't just give up on it's easy these days, human reason and the human heart. But when heartbeat bills were on the floor of these states and they said, this is the baby, this is the beating heart, and they play the heartbeat, there were Democrats who just said, I just can't vote against that. It won't sit well, and they became less pro-abortion. So
laws are powerful teachers. I mean, that's why we saw, in the early 90s, we're talking close to 2 million abortions a year, drops dramatically by the end of the decade, probably largely because of the debate over the partial birth abortion ban. Now, in practice, that ban hasn't really probably saved any lives. It just bans one method of abortion. You could take a look at it in the Supreme Court decision, where it was the big pro-life decision where they upheld the partial birth abortion ban. And the Supreme Court, like, the writing is horrendous. It's like, you could kill the baby a lot of different ways. You could do this, you could do that. You could kill the baby by doing this. It's not a pro-life decision, even though it upheld the partial birth abortion ban. I think the heartbeat bill does the same thing. People are talking about heartbeats. And when we start, this is where we get into like 15-week bill. Like, I'm grateful for anything that reduces the number of abortions. But how is the law a teacher when we're promoting these very arbitrary cutoffs?
Yeah. it also sets us up for a disaster against the pro-abortion folks, because they're like, you're pro-life, and then I just show an ultrasound of a 14-week-old baby and be like, you're gonna kill her, and you claim you're pro-life, claim you're some kind of Christian, some kind of good person. That's the route I would go with the 15-weeker, and that's why I'm not a huge fan. Okay, as we close out, let's ask the question, do pro-life people need to settle politically or compromise politically? Now, the definition of politics essentially now is compromise. So, of course, there's going to be some compromise. I don't envy the people that have to write these bills or debate this, but there has to be a line. And as you mentioned and gave credit to the homosexual movement for just, we will not give an inch, you will accept us, or you will be sued and lose. There is compromise, obviously, in these, until we get just an all-out ban. But I think where people are is really bad. So we have a couple examples. Okay, Sean Hannity, he's pro-life. He said, I believe in the sanctity of life, but I think politically that Republicans have to say, as Bill Clinton once said, I never thought I would quote him, rare, legal, and I'll add the words very early in a pregnancy. That seems to be politically where the country is at. Before we go to the next one, Steve, I think most people are like, yeah, that probably is where the country's at, but they're not thinking about it. What is early in the pregnancy? Because that would be 6 weeks. And Trump is saying, no, that's a terrible thing. So
there seems to be this misconception that we need a majority to win, and the LGBT folks certainly didn't get a majority. Sometimes what you need is a highly committed group of people who are willing to fight for their convictions, and the people who are sitting on the couch watching television go along with it. You need leadership, not consensus.
And we just can't get away with it in 2023. We can't. History will be a harsh judge, and this is only the second time we've done this. And we can't say, look, you're only a slave from 18 to 25 years of age. And then you get $25,000 bonus, and you can go do whatever you want. You can work wherever, but you have to serve your time as a slave. You know, we're one of the freest states. What are you talking about? Some states have slavery until you die. We're only giving you a couple of years. What's your problem? So you understand how absurd this sounds when you put it in proper historical context. And that's why abortion should be unthinkable and banned around the world, because everybody deserves a right to live, particularly once they're already alive. So I think that the fumbling and the bad messaging and there's a couple of things, and I'll wrap up with this. It's never positive. They don't brag on the Supreme Court dragging us out of 1973 science, number one. They don't call out liberal justices who said Roe v. Wade was bad law. They don't call out late-term abortion and infanticide. They don't brag on pregnancy resource centers outnumbering abortion providers 5-1 without one nickel from the federal government. They don't brag on the number of women who got free medical care there or got some state tax help and has their baby. They don't show pictures of babies. I mean, it's just such a positive message. And they are walking around, like they have a stomach ache going, please don't ask me about abortion. And they don't know what to say. And when they answer, it's really bad. So we'll continue to watch this. We'll also see if it gets fixed. But this is very important, not because we have to just talk about politics, which we actually haven't done in a long time on the podcast, but because this is a post-Roe issue. How are people, we've covered Hollywood, how have they dealt with it? How has corporate America dealt with it? How has the military dealt with the overturning of Roe? And how will future, quote unquote, pro-life politicians deal with the overturning of Roe? And that is starting with these Republican primaries. So we're going to continue to talk about it and sort of break it down, because it'll help us know how to help you speak about these issues day to day, because with every debate with Trump, I mean, I had people at church. Did you see Trump's thing? This is going to help. This is going to dictate how it comes up in everyday life. So we will stay on top of it. So, and in the meantime, we will obviously, out of grave concern for Steve and his family, be looking out to see if the Brewers do in fact win their division and go to playoffs. So Steve, you will be in our thoughts and prayers.
I appreciate that, Sean, and I think we're in pretty good shape, but hopefully it continues. Wouldn't it be fun to have an Astros-Brewers World Series?
Not for the listeners. They would be miserable because that would dominate the October podcasts. But it would be fun. It would definitely be fun. So let's hope for that. Okay, until then, we will see you in October. Please rate, review, and share this podcast, and we will see you next time. God bless you.